Have you ever had that feeling where your mind says you're fine, but your stomach clearly disagrees? The job interview that makes you nauseous, the stressful text message that kills your appetite, the random day where your body feels heavy, your thoughts feel foggy, and you can't quite explain why. We usually talk about those moments as if the brain is in charge and the gut is just reacting. But what if that isn't the full story? What if part of what you call your mood is not just happening in your head, but also being shaped much lower down inside your digestive tract by a nervous system, an immune system, and trillions of microbes that are talking to your brain all day long? Because that is not a metaphor. Your gut really does have what scientists call a second brain. And I want to be careful with this topic right from the start because this is exactly the kind of subject that gets flattened into bad internet advice. I'm not going to tell you that every mental health struggle is secretly a gut problem. I'm not going to tell you that one probiotic yogurt will fix your anxiety. And I'm definitely not going to turn a real complicated area of science into a feel good slogan. What I want to do instead is something much more useful. I want to show you what is actually there. The real anatomy, the real signaling pathways, the real biology that connects your gut to your mood, your stress response, your emotional state, and even the way your brain interprets the world. Once you see the architecture of that system, the phrase gut feeling starts sounding a lot less poetic and a lot more literal. So let's build this from the ground up. The first thing to understand is that your digestive tract is not just a food tube. It is lined with its own vast network of neurons called the enteric nervous system, or ENS. Depending on how it's counted, that system contains somewhere between 100 million and 600 million neurons. That's more than your spinal cord, enough that neuroscientists routinely refer to it as the second brain. Not because it writes novels or solves equations, but because it controls digestion, coordinates muscle contractions, regulates enzyme release, manages blood flow, senses what's happening inside the gut, and communicates continuously with the brain in your skull. So already, this changes the picture. Your gut is not a passive bag of chemistry waiting for instructions from above. It is an active, sensing, signaling organ with its own neural network, making decisions in real time. Now, why does that matter for mental health? Because the second brain and the first brain are in constant conversation, and they do not communicate through just one channel. They communicate through several at once. One of those channels is the vagus nerve, which is basically a massive information highway connecting the brain to organs throughout the body, including the gut. Another channel is hormonal, another is immune, another is metabolic, meaning the actual chemical byproducts produced by gut microbes can influence the nervous system. So when people talk about the gut-brain axis, that is what they mean. Not a vibe, not a trend, a bidirectional communication network. And that word bidirectional matters. We tend to imagine stress starting in the mind and then traveling downward. You're worried and then your stomach knots up. That's real. But the signal also moves the other way. Irritation in the gut, inflammation in the gut lining, disruption in the microbiome, changes in motility, changes in the chemicals being produced in the digestive tract. Those signals can move upward and influence the brain. So sometimes the brain disturbs the gut and sometimes the gut disturbs the brain. In real life, most of the time, both are happening together. This is why mental health and gut health keep showing up in the same conversation. Now, let me bring in one of the most repeated facts in this space because it's important, but it is also often misunderstood. You've probably heard that about 90 to 95% of the body's serotonin is produced in the gut. That is broadly true. Most of your body's serotonin is made in the gastrointestinal tract, mainly by specialized cells lining the gut. But here's the part people often skip. That does not mean happiness is stored in your intestines. It doesn't mean if you raise gut serotonin, you automatically feel amazing. Biology is more precise than that. What it does mean is that the gut is deeply involved in the chemical signaling environment of the body. Serotonin in the gut helps regulate motility, secretion, sensation, and communication with nerve endings that connect back to the central nervous system. So the gut is not just digesting breakfast, it is participating in a much larger signaling network that affects how the whole system functions. And serotonin is only one piece. Because once you move one layer deeper, you run into the microbiome. Right now, inside you, there are roughly 38 trillion bacterial cells, not 10 times more than human cells like people used to say. That old claim was an exaggeration. The more accurate estimate is much closer to 1, about 38 trillion bacterial cells alongside around 30 trillion human cells in a typical adult body. And most of those microbes live in the large intestine. These organisms are not decorative. They are not just along for the ride. They break down fibers you cannot digest on your own. They produce short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, acetate, and propionate. They influence the gut lining. They interact with immune cells. They help shape inflammation. They affect the release of signaling molecules. Some even influence the availability or metabolism of compounds related to neurotransmission, including GABA, serotonin pathways, and glutamate-related processes. So, when the microbial community is healthy, diverse, and well fed, the signals moving through the gut brain axis tend to look different from when that ecosystem is depleted, imbalanced, or inflamed. And this is where the story starts becoming genuinely fascinating because mental health is not just about one neuron firing in the brain, it is also about the background conditions under which the brain has to operate. Is the immune system activated or calm? Is inflammation low or elevated? Is the vagus nerve receiving steady, healthy sensory input or distress signals? Are gut microbes producing beneficial compounds from fiber fermentation? Or is the environment being pushed in a more chaotic direction by chronic stress, low fiber diets, poor sleep, alcohol, ultra processed foods, repeated antibiotics, or irregular eating patterns? Your brain is not floating in isolation. It is making sense of signals coming from the entire body, and the gut is one of the loudest organs in that conversation. Now, I want to pause on inflammation for a minute, because I think this is one of the clearest bridges between gut biology and mood. The lining of your gut is not just there to separate food from blood. It is an active barrier, selective, intelligent, and constantly monitored by the immune system. In fact, a huge portion of your immune activity is concentrated around the gastrointestinal tract. That makes sense. The gut is one of the main places where the outside world meets the inside of the body. When that barrier is irritated, whether by infection, chronic stress, poor diet, excess alcohol, or certain disease states, immune signaling changes. Cytokines and other inflammatory molecules can enter the bloodstream and influence brain function. And that matters because mood is not purely psychological, it is also biological. If the immune system is repeatedly pushing distress signals through the body, the brain does not ignore that. It adjusts. This is one reason researchers are so interested in the gut-brain axis in conditions like anxiety and depression, not because they've solved the mystery, they haven't, but because the overlap is too consistent to dismiss. There are human studies showing associations between gut microbiome patterns and depressive symptoms. For example, researchers have identified certain microbial groups that tend to be depleted in people reporting more depressive symptoms, while others appear more abundant. But this is where precision matters again. Association is not causation. These studies do not prove that one bacterium causes depression. Mental health conditions are complex, multifactorial, and shaped by genetics, trauma, environment, sleep, stress, relationships, hormones, and many other factors. The microbiome appears to be one part of that larger picture, not the whole picture. And honestly, I think that makes the science more interesting, not less. Because it means we are not looking at a single magic bullet. We are looking at an ecosystem, a web of interactions, a system where stress can affect the gut and the gut can affect stress, where sleep can alter inflammation, inflammation can affect mood, mood can affect eating, eating can reshape the microbiome, and the microbiome can in turn alter signaling back to the brain. That's not neat, but it is real. Think about what happens during prolonged stress. Cortisol rises, digestion changes, motility changes. Some people get diarrhea, some get constipation, some lose appetite, some eat constantly. Sleep gets worse, food choices usually get worse, alcohol becomes more tempting, exercise drops. That combination can shift the microbial environment and irritate the gut lining. Then the gut starts sending back its own signals of distress. At that point, what started as a stressful week in the mind has become a whole body feedback loop. And feedback loops are powerful because they don't need one dramatic event, they just need repetition. This is also why everyday language about emotions so often points downward. Butterflies, a pit in your stomach, feeling sick with worry, not being able to stomach something, going with your gut. Human beings noticed this connection long before we had microscopes or sequencing technology. We felt it first. Science is now giving us the map. Now, if you're wondering whether that means changing the gut can meaningfully change the mind, the honest answer is yes, sometimes, but not in a simple or universal way. Dietary pattern matters, sleep matters, stress management matters, physical activity matters. The diversity of plant fibers in the diet matters because different microbes feed on different fibers. Fermented foods appear promising in some research because they may increase microbiome diversity and lower certain inflammatory markers. But again, this is not the same as saying fermented cabbage is an antidepressant. It means the terrain of the body can be influenced, and that terrain may affect mental and emotional functioning over time. That's a more responsible way to think about it, and I think it's a more empowering way too, because it means gut support is not a replacement for therapy, medication, or professional care when those are needed. It is a support layer, a biological foundation, something that can either work with the brain or quietly work against it day after day. If your gut is constantly inflamed, underfed, sleep deprived, chemically irritated, and microbially imbalanced, you're asking your brain to operate on top of a noisy signal. The brain may still function, but it is doing so under worse conditions. On the other hand, when digestion is steadier, inflammation is lower, bowel patterns are more regular, and the microbial environment is better supported, the signals reaching the brain may become less chaotic. Not euphoric, not miraculous, just less chaotic. And for a lot of people, that distinction matters. So, what does supporting the second brain actually look like in ordinary life? Usually, it looks a lot less glamorous than the internet wants it to. More fiber from real food, more dietary variety, more legumes, vegetables, nuts, seeds, fruit, oats, whole grains. Less constant reliance on highly processed, low fiber food that feeds you quickly but feeds the microbiome poorly. Better sleep. Less alcohol, more movement, less chronic stress if you can manage it. Sometimes fermented foods like plain yogurt, kefir, kimchi, or sauerkraut if they work well for your body. Not because they are magical, but because the ecosystem they influence appears to matter. And if you struggle with a mental health condition, I think the most accurate thing to say is this. Your gut may not be the whole story, but it is very unlikely to be irrelevant. That to me is the big shift. Mental health is not just a story about thoughts. It is also a story about tissues, nerves, hormones, microbes, sleep, inflammation, and the signals moving between them. The second brain does not replace the first one, but it talks to it constantly. And if you've never learned to include the gut in the mental health conversation, then you're trying to understand the system with half the map missing. Let me close with this. Inside you right now is a nervous system with hundreds of millions of neurons, a microbial ecosystem with roughly 38 trillion residents, a chemical factory producing signals that influence immunity, digestion, stress response, and communication with the brain. All of that is active whether you think about it or not. All of it is participating in how you feel more than most people realize. So the next time you think of mood as something that lives only in the mind, remember that your brain is not making those feelings alone. It is making them in partnership with the body. And one of its closest, loudest, most biologically sophisticated partners is the gut. The second brain has been speaking to the first one your entire life. The question is not whether that conversation is happening. The question is whether you've been taught to hear it. So if this video helped you see mental health from a different angle, make sure to subscribe to the channel. And if you want, leave a comment telling me which part of the gut-brain connection surprised you most. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.